I was 63 years old the Christmas my son-in-law told me I had 30 days to leave the house I helped buy. He didn't pull me aside. He didn't whisper it privately in the hallway, the way a decent man might have. He said it at the dinner table, with my daughter sitting right beside him, with my 7-year-old granddaughter Willie in the next room singing along to Jingle Bells on the television, with the smell of the ham I had spent 4 hours preparing still hanging warm in the air. He looked across the table, set down his fork, and smiled the way people smile when they've already won. "Carol," he said, "we need to talk about the living situation. We've found a buyer. Closing is February 3rd. You'll want to start looking for something before the new year." Everyone at the table went still. My daughter Rachel looked down at her plate. My son-in-law Daniel kept smiling, and I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, thinking of the check I had written 3 years ago. $140,000. The entire proceeds from selling the home where I had raised Rachel for 22 years. I thought of the conversation we'd had at Rachel's kitchen table back then, the one where Daniel spread out the papers and said the house would belong to all of us, where Rachel held my hand and said, "Mom, this is going to be so good. We'll all be together." I thought of how I had believed her. And I thought of one other thing, something Daniel didn't know I knew, something I had found 6 weeks earlier, tucked inside a manila folder in the filing cabinet in his home office on an afternoon when I was looking for the warranty on the refrigerator. A deed. A deed with my signature on it, dated 14 months ago, a signature I had never written. Let me go back to the beginning because I want you to understand how this happened. Not because I'm proud of how trusting I was, but because I know some of you listening right now are in a situation that looks a lot like mine did 3 years ago. And if my story keeps even one of you from making the same mistake, then it's worth telling every word of it. My name is Carol. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a librarian in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio. My husband, Frank, passed away 9 years ago from a heart attack at 61. We had one daughter, Rachel, and she was everything to us. Frank and I weren't wealthy people, but we were careful. We paid off our home, we saved, we lived modestly, and we were proud of it. After Frank died, I stayed in our house for 6 years. It was too big for one person, and some nights the quiet was so heavy I could barely breathe, but it was mine. It was full of Frank. His workbench was still in the garage. His coffee mug was still in the cabinet. Then Rachel called me one evening in the spring 3 years ago. "Mom," she said, "Daniel and I have been talking. The house here is big enough, and Lily keeps asking why Grammy doesn't live with us. We want you to come. I want you to understand what those words meant to me at 60 years old, recently retired, living alone with a bad hip and a cat named Biscuit. When your daughter says, 'We want you to come,' it fills something in you that has been hollow for a very long time." I asked about the finances. I told Rachel I didn't want to be a burden, that I had the equity in my house and I could contribute. Daniel got on the phone then. He was warm, practical, confident, the way he always was. He explained that the house they were in was a rental, that they'd been wanting to buy something bigger anyway, and that if I sold my place and contributed toward a purchase, we could all own it together. "It'll be an investment for you, Carol," he said. "You'll be on the title. It's your home as much as ours." I sold my house in Columbus for $142,000. I gave Daniel a check for $140,000. I kept $2,000 in my savings account, enough, I thought, for emergencies. He found a house in a suburb outside of Cincinnati within 2 months. 4 bedrooms, a big backyard for Lily, a sunroom he said was perfect for me. The purchase price was $310,000. Between my contribution and their mortgage, it worked out cleanly. I never saw the closing documents. Daniel said it was easier if he handled the paperwork. Rachel said he was good with that kind of thing. I said, okay. I want to stop here and say something directly, especially to anyone who is nodding along right now, who is thinking I would never be that foolish. I was not a foolish woman. I had managed my own finances for decades, paid my own taxes, served on my library's board of directors for 11 years. I was not naive. I was trusting. There is a difference, and the people who exploit that difference know exactly what they're doing. The first year in the house was genuinely good. I helped with Lily in the mornings before school. I cooked dinner 3 or 4 nights a week. I tended the garden in the backyard and planted tomatoes that Frank had always loved. Rachel and I had our coffee together on Saturday mornings the way we used to when she was in college and would call home. The shift was so gradual I almost didn't notice it. Daniel started working from home more. The office he used was on the main floor, near the kitchen, and he began making comments when I came through during his calls. Nothing ugly at first, just a look, a pause, a slight tightening around the eyes. Then small things. My shows were too loud. My cat was bothering him. Could I maybe keep to the sunroom and my bedroom during the day? Rachel started echoing him the way she always had. Mom, you know how he gets during work hours. Mom, it's just easier if we have some space. By the second year, I was eating most of my dinners alone in the sunroom. Lily would sometimes sneak back to visit me, climbing up on the armchair beside mine, asking me to read to her. One evening, she looked up at me with those big eyes and said, "Grammy, how come you don't eat with us anymore?" I told her Grammy just liked the quiet. She looked at me for a long moment, the way children do when they know you're not telling the full truth, and then she rested her head on my arm. That was the evening I started keeping notes. Nothing dramatic. Just a small spiral notebook I kept in my nightstand. Dates, incidents, exact words when I could remember them. I had been a librarian for 31 years. I documented things. It was simply what I did. The third year brought Daniel's business venture. He had always worked in commercial real estate, but he told Rachel he wanted to start his own firm. He told her it would mean a tight period financially. There were months where Rachel asked me to cover the groceries. Once, she asked if I could pay the electric bill. I did because she was my daughter, because Lily was in that house, because I still believed we were a family working through something hard together. I didn't ask about my name on the deed. I told myself there was plenty of time for that. Then in October, about 6 weeks before Christmas, I was looking for the refrigerator warranty because the ice maker had been making a grinding noise. I checked the kitchen drawer where Rachel kept appliance manuals. Not there. I tried the filing cabinet in Daniel's office. He'd always said that's where important documents were kept. The top drawer had the appliance files. The warranty wasn't there either. But while I was flipping through the hanging folders, my finger stopped on one labeled simply, Property, Lakewood Doctor. That was our address. I pulled it out. Inside were several documents, the original mortgage papers, some insurance records, and near the back, a folded document on heavier paper. I opened it. It was a quitclaim deed, dated 14 months earlier. It transferred my interest in the property as a co-owner to Daniel and Rachel exclusively. At the bottom was my signature. I stood in that office for what felt like a very long time. I am not a woman who panics. Frank always said my greatest strength was that I thought before I moved. So I stood there, and I breathed, and I looked at that signature very carefully. It was a good forgery. But it wasn't mine. The loop on the C in Carol, I've always made it open, the way my third-grade teacher showed me. This one was closed. The R in my last name drifted slightly right, which my handwriting never does. I photographed every page with my phone. I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it. I went back to the sunroom and I sat very still watching the backyard until dinner. I said nothing at dinner. I said nothing for 6 weeks. Instead, I called my friend Patricia, who had retired from 30 years as a paralegal, and whose judgment I trusted more than almost anyone alive. I told her what I'd found. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always loved about Patricia. Then she said, "Carol, you need a real estate attorney. Not tomorrow, today." Through Patricia, I found a woman named Susan Hartley. She was in her mid-50s, had spent 20 years handling property disputes, and had the calm of someone who had seen every variety of human dishonesty without being surprised by any of it. I brought her the photographs on a Thursday afternoon. She looked through them without expression. Then she set them down and looked at me. "Was this deed filed with the county?" I asked. "I'll check," she said. "But Carol, if it was, and that signature is forged, what you have here isn't a family dispute. It's a crime." She called me the following Monday. The deed had been filed. 14 months ago, Daniel had recorded it with the Hamilton County Recorder's Office. On paper, I no longer owned any share of the house I had contributed $140,000 to purchase. Susan also found something else. 3 months after the deed was filed, Daniel had taken out a home equity line of credit against the property, $60,000. The application listed him and Rachel as sole owners. My money had been used to buy a house. The house had been taken from me on paper, and then it had been borrowed against, without my knowledge, without my consent, on the basis of a document bearing a signature that was not mine. I sat across from Susan, and I thought about Daniel at that dinner table with his fork set down and his smile already in place. And I understood then that the announcement about the buyer and the February closing date wasn't impulsive. It had been planned. He had found a buyer, he had calculated the timeline, and he had intended to put me out on the street with nothing, not even the return of what I'd invested, because on paper I had already signed it away. I thought about Rachel. I did not want to believe my daughter knew, but I also knew I had to prepare myself for the possibility that she did. "What are my options?" I asked Susan. She laid them out clearly. We could file a civil suit to quiet title, challenging the validity of the deed on the grounds of forgery. We could report the forged signature to law enforcement. Forging a property deed is a felony in Ohio. We could seek an injunction to halt the planned sale of the house pending the outcome. And we could pursue recovery of the funds Daniel had drawn on the equity line. "It won't be fast," she said, "and it will be hard on your family." "My family," I said, "has already decided what I'm worth to them." We filed the injunction first, which halted the sale. Daniel's attorney, and he had won within 48 hours, which told me everything about how prepared he had been, contested it immediately, but the judge allowed it to stand pending investigation, because Susan had presented the deed alongside a handwriting analysis from a certified forensic examiner who had looked at the photographs within 10 days of my first visit to Susan's office. I want to address something directly because I know some of you may be thinking what several people have said to me. Why didn't I just confront Rachel? Why didn't I sit down with my daughter and ask her what she knew? Because I had spent 2 years watching Rachel tell me my television was too loud and my presence was an inconvenience. Because I had watched her echo every word her husband said without question. And because if I confronted her before I had legal protection in place, Daniel would have had the house sold and me out the door within 30 days, with no recourse and no record. You protect yourself first, then you fight for your relationships. The law enforcement report went to the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office in January. By March, Daniel was formally charged with 2 felony counts. One for the forged deed, one for the forged equity application. Rachel was not charged, though she was interviewed. What she knew and when she knew it I have never fully learned. Some things a daughter doesn't tell her mother, and some things a mother doesn't press. The civil suit settled 4 months after that. The house was placed in my name as sole owner. Daniel and Rachel were given 90 days to relocate. The equity line was voided, and Daniel was required to personally repay the $60,000 as part of his criminal plea arrangement. I want to be honest with you about the parts that don't have a clean ending. Rachel called me in April, the week after the settlement. She was crying in the way she used to cry as a little girl, that deep, hiccuping kind of crying that she could never quite get under control. She said she hadn't known about the deed. She said she hadn't known about the equity line. She said she was sorry. I believed her. Partially. Enough to take her call, not enough to forget that for 2 years she had let her husband make me feel unwelcome in a house that was half mine and had said nothing. "We need time," I told her. "And we need to do this carefully, with help. We have been seeing a family therapist every other week since May. It is hard and slow, and sometimes I leave those sessions feeling worse than when I walked in. But Lily came to stay with me for a week last summer, just her and Grammy, and we planted tomatoes in the backyard together, and she told me about her friends at school. And some evenings, if I'm quiet enough, I can almost hear Frank telling me I did the right thing. Daniel's case is still moving through the courts. His attorney has negotiated a plea, and sentencing is scheduled for next spring. I don't think about him much anymore. I think about what comes next. There are 3 things I want every woman listening to this to carry with you when you leave. First, your name must be on the deed, not promised. Not, we'll handle the paperwork soon. On the deed. Before you write any check, before you sell any house that holds your history, before you move a single box. Your name goes on that document and you hold a copy in your hand. A verbal promise from someone who loves you is still only air. Second, keep records. I know it feels cold to document the people you love. It felt cold to me too, sitting in my sunroom with that little spiral notebook, writing down dates and words. But that notebook, combined with those photographs, is what allowed Susan to build a case. Evidence doesn't preserve itself. You have to decide to preserve it. Third, slow down. When someone presents you with a plan that requires you to move quickly, to trust completely, to sign without reading, that urgency is almost never for your benefit. Take the time. Hire the attorney. Ask the questions that feel rude to ask. The people who truly have your interests at heart will wait. I am still in the house on Lakewood Drive. The sunroom faces east, and in the mornings the light comes in gold and low the way it does in winter. I have repotted my plants. I have rehung the photographs that Frank and I took on our trip to the Smoky Mountains the year before he got sick. Biscuit has claimed the armchair by the window as his permanent residence, and I have decided not to argue with him about it. Last Saturday morning, Rachel came over and we had coffee together. We didn't talk about Daniel, or the court dates, or the therapist's last session. We talked about Lily's science project, and about the sweet potato casserole recipe Rachel wanted to try for Easter, and about how the tomato seedlings I'd started indoors were looking healthy. It was not everything, but it was something, and for now, something is enough. I spent 31 years helping people find the stories they needed. I spent 2 years letting someone make me feel like a guest in my own home. I spent 14 months having my name erased from a piece of paper without my knowledge. I am 63 years old, and my name is Carol, and I am still here. And that, I have decided, is enough to begin with.